A millionaire tech executive was brutally stabbed in his heart and left to bleed out and die. Now, a year after the horrific attack, the woman at the center of the shocking murder is back in the spotlight and could soon give her side of the story as to how her alleged lover was killed at the hands of her brother. On April 4th of 2023, Cash App founder Bob Lee was reportedly partying until the early morning hours. But by 2:30 that morning, he was discovered bleeding out and begging for help. Authorities would trace the attack to someone who knew the Cash App founder, who happened to be an associate in the tech industry. Police would ultimately connect the murder to a then 38-year-old Nima Momeni, who faces trial for the tech exec's murder. Lee's murder sent shockwaves through the tech industry, as initially many seemed to wonder what would prompt Momeni to allegedly kill Lee. Prosecutors claim Momeni planned the attack after an argument over his younger and married sister, Khazur Momeni, who Lee allegedly had an affair with. According to previous reports, Lee and Khazur were involved in an affluent San Francisco party scene known as the Lifestyle, an underground scene within the tech community that involved recreational drug use and casual sex. Lee and Khazur were reportedly at one of the sex and drug-filled parties on the night of the murder. A close friend of Lee said Momeni and Lee had an earlier discussion on the night of the stabbing about Momeni's sister and whether she was doing drugs or anything inappropriate at these parties. Nima Momeni and Bob Lee were spotted on security footage on that same night leaving Khazur's luxury condo, and just a half an hour later, Lee was found fighting for his life just blocks away. The prosecution in their opening statement reportedly told jurors the video shows the two men getting out of the car in an isolated spot by the Bay Bridge, and then Momeni stabbed Lee 3 times, then tossed the knife he took from his sister's kitchen set and drove away. Momeni allegedly told his sister the following morning he didn't know what happened to Lee that night, but he was preparing a rape case against him because he believed Lee assaulted his sister. Police would later find a kitchen knife at the scene, which they traced back to Khazur's apartment where she lives with her husband, but with her brother's fingerprints on it. But Momeni's lawyers argue he killed Lee in self-defense, claiming the Cash App founder was high on drugs and tried to kill him. According to reports, the defense said police should have tested the handle of the knife for Lee's fingerprints. The defense in trial is reportedly painting the victim as a frequent drug user, claiming Momeni was standing his ground against someone who had barely slept for 90 hours because he was using cocaine the whole time. An autopsy did show Lee was found with both ketamine, cocaine, and alcohol in his system when he died. During testimony so far in the case, a close friend of Bob Lee took the stand and described arriving at a friend's apartment where they met up with Lee and Khazur, and testified about whippets being used, which is nitrous oxide or laughing gas. Bo Mohazabi testified seeing a bowl of drugs and white powdery substance, but didn't remember seeing anyone doing drugs. At some point during that time, Lee got a call from Momeni, who Mohazabi said he overheard the defendant interrogating Lee and asking him questions like, "What is going on with my sister? What did she take?" The witness told the jury he felt uncomfortable by the exchange and told Lee to get off the phone with Momeni. But according to the defense, Momeni wants to tell his side of the story and could take the stand in his own defense. But likely a key witness to what all went down could come from Momeni's sister herself, who is also set to testify in her brother's trial. Let's bring on now criminal defense attorney Natalie Whittingham-Burrell to break down this case even further. Natalie, there's really just a lot of elements here, but first I have to ask you, what are your thoughts on the self-defense claim, and do you think that it can work in this type of case?
So the aftermath of the case, I think, of the killing is what's really going to be the difficult part for self-defense. So we don't know what happened, with the Cash App founder. We don't know. We weren't there. We didn't see. So it's not that self-defense is impossible. It could have never been self-defense. It's just that the actions of the accused in a self-defense case where it's only the decedent who's no longer alive to tell their side of the story and the defendant who's interested in not being convicted, there's going to be a credibility issue there. So by his actions, what I mean is, or by their actions, had it been this happened and they immediately called 911. Oh my goodness, I just got into this unexpected physical confrontation with someone. And in order to save my own life, I killed them. Please, or I harmed them very seriously. Can you please come and render them aid? Instead, my understanding is that the gentleman was left, in the road in an alley without any assistance, and the person just ran away. And they were looking for the perpetrator, and no one came forward the next day. So a lot of the times, the prosecution will correctly use that to their advantage and say, look, you can tell by the fact that this person tried to cover it up, tried to run away, tried to escape, and it wasn't until we caught them that now they're saying self-defense, that this was not a self-defense case. That's how we know that.
Yeah, because stabbing someone right in the heart and leaving them to die, not calling the police, I kind of agree with you there. And then this case also just has so many layers. You have sex, you have drugs, and Nima Momeni's sister, Khazar, is kind of at the center of this whole case. And prosecutors argued that the defendant was under the impression Lee, the Cash App founder, had drugged and raped his sister, and he exacted revenge. What are your thoughts on just the whole prosecution's case overall?
I think that if they can prove that up in court, if they can get past preliminary motions to keep that type of information away from the jury, because the use of drugs can be seen as 404B evidence, prior bad acts evidence, but if they can add it to the motive for this gentleman to kill the Cash App founder, then that's going to be very powerful evidence for them. Because although they don't need to prove motive, motive helps everyday people to understand how a murder could have been committed and why it would have been committed. Without a why, a lot of the times, jurors have a hard time coming to a guilty, but with a why that a human being can understand through their common sense, that usually helps them to get over that hurdle of reasonable doubt. And I think that it's very human. When you have people mixed up in these, it's not exactly a love triangle because it's his sister, but when you have people mixed up in these romantic liaisons, the use of narcotics and substances, that people will act out in unreasonable types of ways. So he had a reason to want to harm the gentleman. It doesn't mean that he set out to kill him. It doesn't mean that he premeditated it and planned it necessarily, but it definitely shifts the jury towards a guilty if they say he had a reason to do it.
And does anything as far as that of what we know right now that sticks out to you that would make you believe that this was a premeditated offense?
The cover up afterwards, the fact of the relationship with his sister makes me think that it's premeditated. I think a lot of guys can relate, yeah, especially ones that have good relationships with their sisters. If I believe someone essayed my sister, then maybe I'm going to be more likely to want to hurt that person. But with what they have right now, I can at least see a motive for revenge. Was there a planning for it to escalate to a killing? That stab wound to the heart leans towards yes, maybe, but there's no way to particularly know. Maybe he just wanted to scare him, maybe beat him up, maybe he didn't intend for it to go that far, but you'll just have to see what plays out.
And Kazar, who is Momeni's sister, is reportedly supposed to take the stand. How critical could her testimony be to either side's case?
She's definitely necessary for the prosecution case because she's going to build in that motive section of it. But she can actually also, and witnesses can do that sometimes, they can be beneficial for both sides, they can give good things for both sides. She could also give the defense a paint a picture of the victim that is negative and would make the jury think that maybe this guy would act out in anger. Maybe he, upon being confronted, hey, you sexually assaulted my sister, maybe he attacked the defendant. And maybe there's something she knows about his personality that would lend to that, or the way in which she characterizes her interactions with him would lend to that. So I can see that being a double edged sword type of testimony.
And in your opinion, what will be more important to the prosecution's case? Do you think it's going to be surveillance video and kind of forensic evidence, or do you think it's going to be witnesses kind of piecing together for the jurors kind of an account of all that was going on during that time?
You just never know with the jury what's going to stick with them the most. And that's why a lot of the times with prosecutors, you see them putting on a lot of evidence. And sometimes you're like, gosh, I mean, you've already proven this point with this piece of evidence. Why do you also need that piece of evidence? But I'll say this, human witnesses, people that get on the stand, swear under oath that they're going to tell the truth and testify, they can be subject to failabilities even if they genuinely mean to tell the truth. And everyone knows that. Witnesses can forget things, they can get tripped up on the stand, they can have motives to not tell the truth. That is not there with surveillance video, right? So if you have surveillance showing somebody going from A to B to C, and then they ended up at C and the person dies at C, and then it shows them walking away from C and the person that met them there doesn't walk away because they get killed, that's very powerful evidence. I think video, they always say in jury instructions that witness testimony is evidence. It has just as much weight as you would give to any evidence as long as you believe that it's true. But we all know how people really feel about video footage and audio footage because it just doesn't lie. So I think that that could be their strongest evidence depending on what it shows.
And even prior to trial, with the whole self-defense claim and aspect by the defense, Nima Momeni, through his attorneys, has said that he wanted to testify in his own defense. Obviously, we haven't gotten to that part yet in the trial, but in your opinion, do you expect Nima Momeni to testify in his own defense? And what could that look like if he does take the stand?
Sure. So in a self-defense case, they tend to go counter to your regular criminal case. Most criminal cases, you want to stay away from putting your client on the stand if you don't have to. But this is one where sometimes you just have to with self-defense. Because as I said in the top, no one else is there to say what happened. There's no one else. And so you need this self-defense, or you need this defendant to get on the stand to say, this is what happened. It was self defense. No one else was there, and I'm going to tell you what happened. Here's why. Here's what you should expect to hear in a self defense defendant's testimony. So I wouldn't be surprised if he got on the stand. That's completely normal and rational if there's no other way that you can prove up that I was acting in self defense. You're going to hear about a state of mind, so the defendant's state of mind. You're going to hear about what the defendant perceived the victim to be doing and saying and how they interpreted that subjectively, because that actually matters, what they actually think about what they're viewing. A lot of the times that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you really believe. You don't have the right, to sell drugs, for example. Like you can't say like, I believed I had the right to do that. And so that's why. But in self-defense, sometimes there's a lesser self-defense and imperfect, what the person subjectively understood at the time, and then whether or not that rises up to the reasonable person standard is going to depend on what the person says. So I would expect a lot of questions about their physical and mental perception of what was happening in that moment.
Right. And I guess we'll have to wait and see how this all kind of plays out as the case is expected to last, I think, until December. So we got a long ways to go there. Natalie, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. But before we sign you off, anything else you'd like to add?
I think his testimony will be the star of the show in any self-defense case. That's going to tell you how the case is going to go. Look to see if you think that he's credible as a viewer, if you think that he's consistent, and if what he says makes sense to you with your common sense.
All right. Natalie Whittingham Burrell, thank you again. Always great to see you. And I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Nima Momeni has been in custody since his arrest. If he's convicted of murder, he faces 26 years to life in prison. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.